The following program contains graphic images. Viewer discretion is advised.
It's the week of March 6, 1995. Thousands of runners head out in the rain for the 10th Los Angeles Marathon. NBA fans are excited about Michael Jordan coming out of retirement to return to the Chicago Bulls. In Mississippi, uniform education rules are ordered to end segregation. The U.S. dollar plunges. And 1 in 3 of the world's workers is facing life, jobless or unemployed. For the families of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, their lives remain focused on a small courtroom in the Los Angeles County Courthouse. As they watch the trial of the man accused of murdering their loved ones, they wonder, will there be justice? People versus O.J. Simpson enters week 7, with the prosecution trying to get back on track after the diversion of Rosa Lopez. One of the first witnesses takes the stand, only to have their testimony interrupted by a different kind of explosive moment in the courtroom. I'm Roger Cossack, and this is OJ25.
Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies to you for the delay in getting started. We had a bomb scare down on the bottom floor, and the sheriffs and the LAPD had to evacuate 2 of the floors. They had to stop all the elevators.
This is the second time there's been a bomb threat in the trial. Jurors have not heard any testimony for a week, thanks to the Rosa Lopez diversion.
The building has been secured, it's not a problem, and we're ready to proceed. Detective Tom Lange has resumed the witness stand. The detective has been reminded he is still under oath. All right, Mr. Cochran, you may resume with your cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning, Detective Lange.
Morning.
You haven't retired yet, have you?
Not yet.
Still there? Okay, great. Good to have you back. As the investigating officer in this case, would it be relevant to you to know, for instance, what time Mr. Goldman had his last meal that evening?
It certainly could be, yes.
And did you ascertain where and when he had his last meal? And what time?
I did not.
All right, but you were present during the autopsy, were you not?
That's correct.
And you're the investigating officer, one of them, is that right?
That's correct.
Time of death is critical in this case, is it not?
Yes.
And did you talk to the coroner's office about the stomach contents of Mr. Goldman, trying to determine when he had his last meal and at what time?
We discussed time of death in regards to stomach contents and the fact that digestion could be retarded if one were under a great deal of stress. Consequently, the findings regarding the contents in the stomach may not always be accurate.
Well, who told you that anyone was under a great deal of stress?
Who told me?
Yes, who told you that?
That's my opinion, that both of these victims would certainly be under a great deal of stress.
What were the stomach contents? When was their last meal? That could be evidence. Whatever they had somehow figure into there. As to time of death, it also comes into play as to if you look at the digestive system and how long it takes to digest whatever that food was, could come into play at time of death.
Have you spoken to any expert forensic pathologist about the state of the stomach contents of Mr. Goldman that night, and whether or not that expert can help us and assist us in determining when Mr. Goldman had his last meal?
Objection not irrelevant beyond the scope.
It's very relevant, Your Honor. It's relevant.
Testify.
Overruled. Speaking objection, Your Honor. Speaking objection. All right, you may answer. Have you?
Regarding time of death?
Yes.
Yes, that and the other factors, and a time of death was given to me between 9 p.m. and 12 midnight, closer to 9.
You're going to be asked about time of death, and you ask me a lot about time of death. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a pathologist, but I know about time of death because you deal with that all the time.
That's not the question I ask you. The question is, have you talked to a forensic pathologist with regard to Mr. Goldman's stomach contents? And has that forensic pathologist been able to look at the state of those of those stomach contents and assist us in determining when Mr. Goldman had his last meal?
Yes, that's an answer.
Specifically as to the stomach contents,
Yes.
no.
Okay, we're talking about stomach contents. No is the answer?
That's correct.
Honestly, I knew what his cross was going to be. And this is a big deal. This is a man who doesn't handle homicide cases. He sues people. He was going to ask me all the basic things that would be expected of a homicide cop and try to follow me up.
Let me see if I can make it so you understand it. Did you ever, as the investigating officer in this case, ever consider any other theory than that O.J. Simpson was the only perpetrator in this case?
Any other theory?
Yes, any other theory, any other possibilities?
I had absolutely no other evidence that would point me in any other direction.
Did you find any information where Mr. Goldman had Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's phone number there?
Again, I didn't investigate or examine anything at that location that may have happened. I don't recall seeing it.
They had a sexual relationship. And there was evidence that came up that never made it to trial that Ron Golden and Nicole Brown Simpson actually drove her white Ferrari up at Rockingham when Simpson was out in the yard and actually made sure that he saw them. Now, the person that said that could have been lying. I don't know why somebody would.
There was all those theories that they were dating, and I don't believe that, because Ron was pretty open about who he was dating. I think I probably met every girl he ever dated.
All right, do you recall that Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's phone number appears twice in these copies? Do you recall that?
That may well be.
You see that phone number there?
That's correct.
Okay, does that appear to be Nicole Simpson?
Yes.
And her phone number?
Yes.
And so you see at least on 2 occasions her numbers found in these documents that were allegedly found in Mr. Goldman's apartment?
Yes.
And in fairness, there are other female numbers, other female names with numbers therein also.
Yes, sir. Yes.
It is my understanding that my brother and Nicole were just acquaintances. It's been told to me that they were friends, that they frequented the same gym and the Starbucks and whatever social activities they can be doing in that little area. But I will say this, even if my brother was having a romantic relationship with Nicole Brown Simpson, it did not justify him being slaughtered to death and Nicole being nearly decapitated.
Did you follow up on any of the names of the people contained in this information?
I don't recall if I specifically did or if it was done at all.
I don't think that there was anything tawdry going on between them. And frankly, if they were dating, who cares, right?
If you jump to a conclusion sometimes, don't you find out later that there were other things that you could have looked at by making a quick decision in a particular case? Isn't that true?
Objection, states, argumentative.
Sustained.
You would agree with me that it's not good investigative practices to rush to judgment in the case. Would you agree with that?
Certainly.
Did you ever consider that Mr. Goldman could have been a person followed to that location? Did you ever consider that at all?
I think it's entirely possible he was followed.
When he came to Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's residence, did you ever consider that as a possible theory?
There were a lot of theories out there, and in one of the TV shows, they attributed the theory of the necklace, the Columbia necklace. I totally rejected it. I didn't think that it was our burden to come up with theories and hypotheses. I thought our job was to tear apart the prosecution's case, which we did very effectively.
Once you came to your conclusion or you developed your theory that she was killed first, it's true, is it not? You never looked at any other possible theories, isn't that correct?
My theory that she was killed, that's not my theory that she was killed first. That was in response to a question as to something that may have possibly happened. I can't tell you who was killed first.
Is that your theory? That she was killed first?
No.
That's not your theory?
No.
You don't believe that?
I don't know.
Well, in this superficial investigation you did regarding the possibility of drugs, what did you do?
In any murder, there's always the possibility of drugs.
Can you answer my question? What did you do with regard to your superficial investigation regarding drugs in this case, not any murder?
Overruled.
Go ahead and answer the question.
Considered the possibility that drugs may have been involved by looking for evidence of drugs at the scene or becoming aware of any knowledge that the victim might have had something to do with drugs. That's normally something we would do if we had another direction to go. This particular case, we had another direction to go.
They wanted to portray this as some Colombian drug deal gone bad, and I don't believe any of that. It just doesn't make sense, because the level of conspiracy would have to be so deep and so intricate and so perfect. It just doesn't work like that. Nothing works like that.
Based on your experience, sir, and training, in your opinion, was the murder of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown a drug-related murder?
I do not believe they were.
Please tell us why.
It's been my experience that the vast majority of drug-related murders are carried out with a handgun or a firearm of some type. It's also been my experience that usually there will be evidence of narcotics usage or sales at the location, such as scales or debris from narcotics, something to indicate the sales or use of narcotics.
Did you find any evidence of drug usage or sales at 875 South Bundy?
No.
OJ really opened up about Nicole, and he said a few days ago that Nicole had come over to the house and wanted to borrow a large amount of money. He said that she had gotten into some trouble with some drug dealers, and she owed him $50,000, and he had said no to her.
As a good investigator, don't you continue, and don't you, as an investigator, try to develop evidence as it comes forward? Isn't that correct?
If it comes forward, I certainly do.
Right. You don't turn a blind eye on evidence just because it might point toward Mr. Simpson's innocence, do you?
Just the contrary.
All right. So you would follow any particular lead, and any such lead regarding possible drug involvement would be important to you as an investigator. Isn't that correct?
If I felt that this case involved drugs or drug dealers, it would. The fact is, it doesn't.
Don't be rushed, because these defense attorneys are going to push you, and they're going to push some more. Play those games right back. Deliberately take your time. Deliberately think about things you may not even have to think about. And just take it, and don't get upset. What they want more than anything is for you to get upset.
All right, well, I'm asking you, you said there's new information that you have afterwards, so that you've already made a conclusion in this case that no matter what you heard about drug involvement or Faye Resnick, you don't plan to look into that. Is that what you're saying to us?
No, the fact that the victim may have a friend who uses drugs, and in light of no other evidence in that regard, has very little consequence to me. The fact that every bit of evidence that I have in this case points towards the defendant has a lot more to do with this.
There was a woman named Faye Resnick, whom neither side called at the trial, with a lot of problems, drug problems. She had been living with Nicole. There was a witness we never called, saw Nicole arguing with some people in a white Ford 350 truck on the street outside of her gate. I have to assume that these people had come to collect Faye Resnick, a $30,000 marker for cocaine, and got Nicole by mistake.
We contacted Faye Resnick through her website, and she says, quote, "I'm sorry, but I don't see the point in responding to this outlandish conspiracy theory. These lawyer actors are willing to ruin innocent people's lives in order to keep their guilty clients out of jail by spreading harmful lies to create a shadow of doubt in the mind of the jury, and then continue to lie even after the trial to make themselves feel better about what they've done." End quote.
You ever heard of something called a Colombian necklace?
I believe so.
And it's true, is it not, that a Colombian necklace is a situation where drug dealers will slice the neck of a victim, including the carotid artery, in order to kill the victims and to instill fear and send a message to others who have not either paid for their drugs or have been informing to the police. Isn't that what a Colombian necklace is?
I've heard that.
And, sir, isn't it true that you, in your experience, know about drug killings where knives have been used? Isn't that correct?
I do have knowledge of knives being used, yes.
And, sir, in this connection, you are aware, are you not, that Faye Resnick became a resident at Nicole Brown Simpson's place at 875 South Bundy on or about June 3rd, 1994. Isn't that correct?
No, I'm not.
All right, your superficial investigation didn't reveal that?
Initially, the investigation revealed she may have been. I've since received information that she was not a resident at that location, and that is ongoing.
She nearly bled out. That tells me this isn't a common robbery. This isn't a family dispute. This isn't an argument with a neighbor. This is personal. This is something personal here. That's what it tells me.
Now, in the course of your investigation in this matter, your determination that this was not a drug killing, did you consider the fact that Faye Resnick went into a drug rehabilitation facility on or about June 8th, 1994?
Overruled.
Consider that fact?
I have been told that she had.
The question is now, not what you've been told, sir. Did you consider that fact when you came to this conclusion you told us about yesterday?
When I came to that conclusion I told you about yesterday, I didn't have that knowledge.
All right. So there are other facts that are coming into your knowledge even as we speak in this case, is that correct?
Every day.
I believe they owed drug dealers in LA a lot of money, and they were going to kill Faye Resnick. Nicole would pay up, and then everybody knew in LA that you don't mess with these guys. Faye checked herself into drug rehab 4 days before the murder. Very convenient, nice place to hide. And instead, they accidentally got Nicole instead.
If Faye Resnick was freebasing cocaine on a daily basis at the Bundy location, so much so that she had to have a drug intervention by June 8th of 1994, and you learned that to be a fact, would that change your opinion about this possibly being a drug-related killing?
If I had that information, that would probably be a consideration if I had no other direction to go.
I had more problems with Marcia than Johnny. It's as simple as that.
The following program contains graphic images. Viewer discretion is advised.
Detective Tom Lange's Week 7 testimony details the collection of evidence at O.J. Simpson's home. Meanwhile, Johnny Cochran goes after the detective for handling evidence in ways that Cochran says botched the investigation.
You make mistakes, is that correct?
Mr. Cochran, I make mistakes.
All right.
Yes.
Johnny Cochran, very bright, very dry sense of humor, funny guy. Unless you were on the stand, and I was on the stand when he crossed me.
Were you concerned about trace evidence when you carried those tennis shoes under your arm?
Trace evidence was not foremost in my mind at that time.
At that point, I know trace evidence wasn't uppermost in your mind because you have the shoes against your body there, don't you?
They're against my arm, yes.
Yes, and is that a way that you, as an experienced investigator of over 20 years, learned to carry evidence?
That's one way of carrying evidence, yes.
You learned to carry it that way, did you, at the academy?
There's no one way to learn to carry evidence.
This looks like a lot of trouble for a home of a fellow who's not a suspect.
Well, there is such a thing as the elimination process. That may be part of this. We don't have any answers right now.
The reason that I obtained those shoes was to have red stains checked for the possibility of blood and to obtain a shoe size.
You've told us that, and we know it was negative for blood. Now, you and I had some discussions regarding a green piece of paper inside a bag that contained Mr. Goldman's clothes. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Would it be important in the course of your investigation to try and determine where Mr. Goldman went after he got off work?
Yes.
Did you do anything to try and determine that?
Yes.
And what did you do in that connection?
Detectives Tippin and Carr investigated at Mr. Goldman's apartment and found clothing that he had been wearing that night at work at Mezzaluna.
And did you not tell us that the items in that green paper bag were recovered by Officers Tippin and Carr. You tell us that? Mr. Goldman's residence?
I don't recall if I did. If I did tell you that, then I misspoke. Those clothes were recovered by the Goldman family.
So you want to change your testimony under oath?
If I stated that, then I misspoke.
But you were wrong, right?
Apparently I was.
And you spell out for us the other day that you do make mistakes, isn't that correct?
Just like everyone else, I certainly do.
Well, we're not talking about everybody else right now. We're talking about you.
Well, sometimes you don't know what evidence you have at a crime scene, which is part of the evidence, again, is the body. So you do everything. But what you don't do is what's going to be questioned. What you do is never going to get questioned.
The blood on Miss Nicole Simpson's back, you saw that at the scene, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
That blood was not preserved. Is that correct?
That's correct. The coroner did not preserve that blood.
What about the failure to preserve the stomach contents of Miss Nicole Brown Simpson? Whose fault was that that was thrown out?
I don't know that it was anyone's fault. I do know I'm not in charge of stomach contents or what occurs at the coroner's office.
Talking about other mistakes, with regard to your report, which indicated that you booked 2 dimes and 2 pennies, do you recall that?
Correct.
And in fact, you told us on the stand here you only booked 1 dime and 1 penny. Is that right?
In any of the photographs, did you see 2 dimes and 2 pennies?
No, that's a mistake, and I erred in writing 2 down.
So that was a mistake you made in your notes.
That's correct.
All right. You're a human being?
I hope so.
All right.
That's self-serving.
Overruled. Overruled.
I do make mistakes.
Is that a mistake?
I'd certainly call it a mistake, yes.
I thought the defense very adroitly went after the collection of evidence, and there were mistakes that were made. There were better processes that should have been employed.
When you told us under oath that you had seen these blood spots on the rear gate at Bundy, yet no photographs were taken of those blood spots on June 13th, 1994. Is that a mistake?
Was it a mistake of mine?
I didn't ask whose mistake. I said, was that a mistake, Detective Lange?
I would call that a mistake.
The media had a field day. The defense had a field day. There was a problem of blood on the rear gate. We had 4 print texts there. He didn't pick it up. He told me he was distracted later. The blood wouldn't have mattered.
With regard to things like the ice cream, you never bothered to test the melting rate of ice cream until I started asking you questions. Isn't that correct about that?
Until you made it an issue, that's correct. It was of no evidentiary value to me at all.
Nicole was gonna go get some ice cream with the kids. And we kissed each other goodbye.
Well, as the investigator, again, if you made one of your mistakes that you make on occasion, perhaps we call it to your attention. And now you're testing ice cream. Is that correct?
It's argumentative. It's also badgering the witness at this point.
With regard, let me rephrase it, Your Honor.
Please.
With regard to the ice cream, the first time that you ever did any tests regarding the ice cream was after we started talking about it here in court. Is that correct, sir?
After you made it an issue, that's correct.
With regard to your investigation into the ice cream and the type of ice cream, when did you start that investigation?
As to the melting rate, I believe it was last week, perhaps a week before.
You were able to find out that this ice cream would melt in about an hour, hour and 15 minutes, testing it in 5-minute intervals. Is that right?
Under the conditions that we had, yes.
What time was it that you saw this ice cream cup?
Between 12:30, 12:40 in the morning.
12:30 to 12:40. Now, if Risky found the ice cream still melting at 12:40 a.m., and you extrapolate backwards, would that mean that the person may have been eating that ice cream as late as 11:15, 11:30?
I couldn't say.
All right, at any rate, your investigation on the ice cream continues. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you're doing other investigations also, isn't that correct? That continues, that you've started after this trial, isn't that correct?
We get information on a daily basis, and we conduct this investigation on a daily basis. Everything is ongoing.
The nonsense that he spouted, a lot of it just wasn't true. It was nonsense, like keeping with this theme. Simpson didn't do it. Simpson innocent, cops bad, next case.
And that blanket or sheet had been on top of her body at some point?
Earlier in the day, yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And you never saved that blanket or sheet, did you?
No.
Do you know whether or not there's trace evidence on that blanket or sheet?
Trace evidence?
Trace evidence from her body.
I would have no way of knowing what was on that blanket.
And you never saved it. Was it ultimately thrown away?
I believe so.
There were certainly things that could have been done better. Did it change ultimately what evidence was found? I don't think so. But in terms of specific techniques, things could have been done better.
It's just her blood under her fingernails, contrary to what Mr. Cochran said in his opening statement.
The following program contains graphic images. Viewer discretion is advised.
I'm going to ask you a series of questions about the cross-examination concerning the coroner. The nail scrapings of the blood found under Nicole Simpson's nails?
Yes.
Was DNA testing conducted on those scrapings, sir?
Yes.
And are you aware of the results of those scraping, the DNA tests on the nail scrapings?
Yes, I am.
And did that testing reveal the blood to be hers?
Yes.
Staying calls for hearsay. No, no. Calls for hearsay. Juries to disregard the last question and answer. Proceed.
Did the results of the tests of the nail scrapings under Nicole Simpson's nails cause you to conduct an investigation into any other suspect?
No.
I had more problems with Marcia than Johnny. It's as simple as that. Because of the way she approached it. Again, she had a reason here. Share it with me. If you don't want to look like I'm one of your witnesses that in this case, then tell me before you, so I know. I got stumped a couple of times in some of her questions. I knew exactly where Johnny was going. Marcia was from left field.
There was some mention during the redirect of Mr. Lange as to the existence of some DNA results on the fingernail scrapings of Ms. Simpson. We are not familiar or aware of any reports or anything reflecting that, in fact, there have been DNA tests performed.
Mr. Harmon, what's the latest on that? Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, Your Honor. The fingernail scraping material is very simple, Your Honor. And Dr. Blake, I'm surprised he hasn't passed this on to the defense. Dr. Blake viewed the results on 3 of the scraping items.
Your Honor, I would object to this. I think the only question is whether or not a report has been produced.
Excuse me, Mr. Scheck, please. Don't interrupt counsel.
My objection, Your Honor, is that if he's going to start announcing results in court before we've had a chance to see them, before they've been submitted to Your Honor,
Well, he was
that's
about to,
contrary to
Mr.
our
Scheck. Mr. Scheck, have a seat, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Do you want to know what it is? I mean, it's no surprise. They're consistent with Ms. Brown. It's just her blood under her fingernails, contrary to what Mr. Cochran said in his opening statement.
Expect the evidence to show that there was blood under Miss Nicole Brown Simpson's fingernails. And that does not fit the genetic profile of Mr. Simpson, Mr. Goldman, or Miss Brown.
It seems to me highly improper for the prosecutor to be able to attempt to elicit, potentially elicit, through this witness, testimony, A, that he's incompetent to reveal to the jury, and I'll explain why and how severely prejudiced we are by that, his testifying to this effect. He is not an expert on DNA. He is not an expert on genetic marker systems. And he's not an expert in, he has no personal knowledge as to how these tests were conducted. And that will be significant as this trial unfolds. Prosecution knows that, intentionally tried to elicit that evidence through this witness, knowing all of that. Number 2, they intentionally elicited this testimony through this witness without giving us a report.
Barry Scheck, what did I say in the book? He spots more crap than a ruptured sewer line or something like that.
I'll say something nice about Barry Scheck. I thought I have respect for Barry Scheck as a trial attorney.
We were in this very unusual position that the prosecution is allowed to test whenever they want, in whatever process they want, at whatever speed they want, items of evidence in this case to time it to get a strategic advantage. And this is an example of exactly what they're trying to do.
For counsel to get up and call this misconduct when their own expert knows very well what the results are because he's standing and right over their shoulders watching them do the testing is absurd. If they don't communicate with their own expert, the people can't help them. You know, if they don't want to call the guy and ask what happened with this or what happened with that, if I was them, I would. Something like this where I stood up in front of the jury and made promises that I know might never be delivered, in fact, might come back to slap me in the face, I would be calling daily to find out what those results are.
Mr. Scheck, let me just ask you
I'll
that.
tell you exactly what I know and what I don't know.
Okay.
I know that Ms. Clark just said something that was completely untrue. And she should know it, Mr. Harmon knows it, and he should tell it to the court. They didn't send any fingernail scrapings to be tested to the Department of Justice until after the opening statement in this case, long after. So when Ms. Clark gets up here and says, oh, we should know about this ongoing testing, and I'm in total good faith, to my knowledge, that's not true.
Barry Scheck was amazing. He was concerned about whether or not the position that he was going to be taking in this trial was going to be inconsistent with him holding DNA up as kind of, you know, this great science. He recognized that that's not at all, it wasn't inconsistent. It was all the same thing, which is that DNA is great so long as it's collected properly and the proper protocol is followed.
My proposal to make sure that this doesn't happen again is that after they finish testing on a particular item and get a result, they write a report immediately to the court. That's how we would proceed.
I don't know that that's necessarily practical, but
well,
we'll cross that. We're not there yet.
You would think that on a case of this magnitude that everything would be done right, and a lot of things were done wrong.
You've never done that in the 20-plus years you've been a homicide detective?
Never done it. I've never heard of it.
The defense continues to push a second killer theory by questioning evidence found on the Bundy and Rockingham gloves.
I was asking you about hairs on the gloves. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do your reports indicate whether or not there were Caucasian hairs on the glove found at Bundy?
The report does indicate Caucasian hair, yes.
All right, were there any Caucasian hair found on the other glove that was found?
That's my information, yes.
Johnny Cochran is using Detective Lange to get a message to the juror. Caucasian hairs on the glove. Where do they come from? Either it's another killer, or, probably more importantly for the defense at this point, it's Mark Fuhrman. It's a great move to use the detective, lead detective in this case, to basically implant this other theory, using their witness to their advantage.
Were there Negroid hairs found on either or both of those gloves? If you recall.
I don't recall.
Detective Lange, after you determined that the gloves match, sir, did you make any effort in your investigation to determine what size the gloves were?
Yes.
And what size did you determine them to be?
Extra large.
Sustained.
When you compared the two gloves, the one from Rockingham and the one from Bundy, had you had an interview with the defendant yet?
No.
After examining those, after seeing and comparing those gloves just visually, did you go and see the defendant at Parker Center?
Yes, later that afternoon.
Did you look at his hands?
Yes.
How big do they look?
I've checked before that question, how big they look. It's big.
The O.J. Simpson trial generated over 100,000 pages of documents. Among the trial transcripts, police records, and notes from the coroner, there are also trial memos written by court TV reporters and producers. One of those memos describes a moment unseen by most, even in the courtroom.
In a dramatic moment reminiscent of classic movies about trials of the accused, O.J. Simpson made a subtle but chilling move that created an everlasting vision from this trial. Detective Tom Lange was testifying about the immense size of the bloody leather gloves found at Bundy and Rockingham. Then, as Lange described visiting O.J. Simpson in jail and observing Simpson's hands, which he said were similarly huge, Simpson glanced around and quickly put his hands under the counsel table, out of sight of the jury and the rest of the world. It clearly was the type of thing that may make a defense attorney wince, especially if the jurors had instinctively glanced over to see how large Simpson's hands really are.
And, sir, did you attempt to determine through your investigation what size the gloves were?
Yes. Overruled. Overruled. I'd already determined the size of the gloves.
And did the gloves, did the size of the gloves play a factor in determining whether or not to file the case ultimately on June the 17th?
Object on that question. That's your material.
Overruled. Overruled. It was one of the factors, yes.
Let me ask you about something else. Another factor, sir. The glove that you found at Bundy was, you said, was that right or left-handed?
Left-handed.
When you saw the defendant on June the 13th, did you notice an injury to either hand?
Yes.
Which one?
Middle finger of the left hand.
Did that play any part in making your determination to file the case on June the 17th?
Yes.
There had been a walkthrough which you had participated in with the defense, I think in August, on about August 27th of 1994. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And at that time, a knit cap was pointed out to you. And did you ever see the investigator, McNally, who was there, try the knit cap on?
No.
There were so many anomalous things that occurred that, I mean, you could just go, oh, coincidence, 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 coincidence. But you would think that on a case of this magnitude that everything would be done right, and a lot of things were done wrong.
He mentioned Mr. McNally trying on a knit cap that he pointed out.
Yes.
Did you ever see him do that?
No.
What would happen to trace evidence, such as hair or fiber, on that cap if someone else, an investigator, tried it on?
Be compromised.
What do you mean by that?
A true reading of any trace evidence that was on that cap prior to him putting on his head couldn't be made.
Might his hairs get on the cap?
Certainly.
Might other hairs that are on the cap that are of evidentiary value get lost?
Yes.
Did you try on the ski cap that was found at the feet of Ron Goldman?
No.
Did you try on the glove?
No.
Would you ever do such a thing?
No.
You would not be disappointed if I don't ask you any other questions.
No, sir, I would not.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Detective, thank you very much.
The people called Detective Mark Fuhrman.
Counsel, the first matter we have on the court's calendar today is an amendment to the, or a continuation of the motion regarding Detective Fuhrman. Mr. Douglas.
Your Honor, there really is, as I see it, no real basis to challenge the relevance of the sought information and the fact that, in fact, this information would be critical to a full cross-examination of Mr. Fuhrman. I think, Your Honor, in this regard, it would be important to review the personnel files. I think it also very important, Your Honor, that the investigation over the possession of some cartoon or other picture that may have included a Nazi-like symbol or insignia is another matter that has some possible relevance to a full cross-examination of Mr. Fuhrman.
Well, that was a bad period in my life. It was a bad time.
We were also informed in chambers of the DA's awareness of an investigation that occurred over statements allegedly made by Mr. Fuhrman, suggesting that Mr. Fuhrman may have had some intimate knowledge of Ms. Brown Simpson, or in fact, portions of her anatomy. Clearly, both areas of inquiry are very germane to the issues that we have put forward. If in fact there is any proof that there was some personal contact or acquaintanceship between Mr. Fuhrman and Ms. Simpson, that would be very probative in providing perhaps some bias or basis for bias or basis for some other harboring of ill will or motive against Mr. Simpson in particular.
I am confident the court will find nothing within any of these files to be relevant to these proceedings.
What is your view on the opinion expressed by many of the so-called experts that Fuhrman is a make or break, a crucial witness in this case?
This is hype on the media's part. I mean, it brings more interest in the case. There is no such witness going to make or break a case. Regardless of how Mark Fuhrman comes across to the public, our concern is, does he come across as a believable, candid, respected investigator in front of the jury?
Is the prosecution going to bring the race issue out first and beat the defense to the punch?
You think I'll tell you?
Why Chris Darden for Mark Fuhrman?
Well, to use a legal term, you're assuming facts not in evidence.
You think Chris Darden will not be questioning?
May not be.
The LA County District Attorney's Office was under a great deal of criticism for what happened in the Rodney King case. Now comes the O.J. Simpson case. Race is all over this case. And so they find Chris Darden. Now, what does he do when he's on the prosecution case? It's touchy. How do you figure out exactly what he does? You can't go overboard and say, look, here's our African-American lawyer. We're going to make him and put him in places where we need an African-American to impress the jury.
The prosecution, they blew it. They should never have used Mark Fuhrman. I can't believe that they didn't know that about him. Like, if you're a good prosecutor, a good lawyer, that's something you should know. You have to vet somebody, particularly when the stakes are high, particularly amidst all of the racial tension.
The people called Detective Mark Fuhrman.
I do.
Detective Fuhrman, can you tell us how you feel about testifying today?
Nervous, reluctant. Since June 13th, I've seen a lot of the evidence ignored and a lot of personal issues come to the forefront. I think that's too bad.
The swearing in of Detective Mark Fuhrman closes out week 7 of the O.J. Simpson trial, setting the stage for a moment that turns the trial upside down and inflames racial tensions in this country that are still being felt today.
Anyone who comes to this court and quotes you as using that word in dealing with African Americans would be a liar, would they not, Detective Fuhrman?
Yes, they would.
All of them, correct?
All of them.
That's next on OJ25. I'm Roger Cossack.